Chapter 58. Satan Springs His Trap. The year was 1951. Johannesburg shook under the seismic shock of William Branham's ministry, sending spiritual tremors across the entire southern tip of Africa. Those who attended the first meetings called their families and friends to tell them what they saw. Every night the crowds grew larger. By Tuesday night, October 8, 1951, Bill's third night in the city, over 17,000 people jammed into Maranatha Park to see the discernment. Many who came sick went out healed. Almost everyone left excited, spreading the news that a prophet was visiting South Africa, that Jesus Christ was in this prophet doing the same works he did when he walked the roads of Palestine, healing the sick, the crippled, the deaf, the dumb, the blind, revealing the secrets of the heart. Nothing seemed impossible. Wednesday morning, the South African Medical Association invited Bill to have breakfast with them. Their spokesman said, "Reverend Branham, many doctors in South Africa are Christians. We became doctors because we wanted to help people. At first, we were suspicious of you, thinking you might be preaching the Christian Science notion that doctors and medicine are bad and should be avoided. But now it's obvious to us that you support doctors. We believe in divine healing the way you preach it. Reverend Branham, even though the incubation period of your yellow fever shot is not yet over, we are giving you permission to travel in the country anyway. Not only that, we are opening the doors of our hospitals, and any of our patients who want to go to your meetings, we'll see that they get there." After breakfast, Ern Baxter came to Bill and said, "Brother Branham, I've got some news for you. I know you want to go to Durban, but rather than going straight there from Johannesburg, the National Committee has set up an itinerary that will take us over 1,000 miles south to Cape Town, then up the east coast to Durban. How does that sound?" "It doesn't matter to me," said Bill, "just as long as we get to Durban, because that's where I feel led to go. When are we leaving?" "The day after tomorrow." That did strike Bill as peculiar, since they were just getting started in Johannesburg. Not only did they have the endorsement of the local medical association, they even had a favorable review by the press, which was something Bill did not always receive. The meetings were going tremendously well. Each night the size of the crowd increased, as did the number of healings and miracles. Why should they leave so soon? It did not make sense to Bill, but he didn't say anything about it. After all, he was a guest of the South African Ministerial Association, so it seemed only right that he should let them make all his arrangements. That night after the meeting, Bill fell into a fitful sleep. About 2 o'clock in the morning, a strange screech woke him. He stumbled to his bedroom window to see what kind of bird made such an unusual sound. All he could see were reeds waving in a gentle breeze. Returning to bed, he tried to go back to sleep but couldn't. Thinking that reading might help make him drowsy, he switched on a lamp, sat up against the headboard, and opened his Bible. His skin began to tingle, and the hair on the back of his neck bristled. Looking up from his Bible, he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the middle of the room, his white robe shining in the glow from the electric lamp. The breeze from the open window played with the angel's long dark hair. Even in the natural, he was an imposing figure, standing 6 feet tall and weighing at least 200 pounds. In the supernatural, he was awesome, causing Bill's chest to constrict into a tight knot of fear. The angel folded his arms across his chest, gazed sternly at Bill, and said, "Don't go with those men down to Cape Town. Stay here in Johannesburg for 2 more weeks of meetings. Tomorrow you will meet a man." While the angel spoke, the room blurred like a fresh painting in watercolors on which clear water had been spilled. When the colors gelled, Bill found himself looking at a Caucasian man, tanned and vigorous, perhaps 50. He had small ears and a large flat nose. On his head was cocked a safari hat with a leopard skin hatband. The vision showed this man dreaming a shocking dream. The angel said, "His name is Sidney Jackson, and he runs a farm up north. He is a great hunter, and he can take you on a safari. After 2 weeks in Johannesburg, you must take the next 10 days and go hunting with Sidney Jackson. Then go straight to Durban and stay there until I call you. If you will do these things, I will give you the country. But how am I going to convince these other men? They have my itinerary all set up. That they might know this is the will of the Lord, tomorrow Reverend Schoeman is going to take you into Johannesburg. The scene changed, and Bill saw a street corner by a park. Bright flowers colored the banks of a ditch. A native woman dressed in purple stood near the corner. The angel said, "Bring this to Reverend Schoeman's attention. After this, they are going to take you to Pretoria." The scene shifted to a highway where a young native girl was selling beads by the side of the road. Her hair was scraped bare on one side of her forehead, revealing a nasty scar. While looking at her beads, Bill heard a squawk and saw a strange bird fly across the road. Here, the angel said, "Remind Ern Baxter that you told him this would happen, so that he will know this is, 'Thus saith the Lord.' When you get to Pretoria, they will take you to pray for a man who thinks he has cancer of the hip, but he is mistaken. He is suffering from a surgical error. During a recent operation, the surgeon's knife slipped, cutting the wrong thing. Don't pray for this man because he is going to die." The vision dissolved around him, and Bill found himself back where he had started, sitting up in bed, his back propped against the headboard, his Bible in his lap, a trickle of sweat running down his temple. The angel of the Lord was gone. Bill ran to the next room to tell his manager, "Brother Baxter, wake up. The angel of the Lord just met me and told me we can't take the itinerary the National Committee set up." Sleepy-eyed, Ern Baxter nodded and mumbled, "Well, you'll have to tell Brother Schoeman tomorrow." In the morning, Bill went looking for Reverend Schoeman. He found the man just as he was leaving on an errand. Bill asked to go along. When they finished the errand and were heading back to the estate, Bill told his host about the angel's visit last night. "So you see, Brother Schoeman, we're going to have to cancel that itinerary." Schoeman ran one hand up over his bald forehead. "Brother Branham, I can't do that. All the dates are set and the arrangements are made. We're leaving for Klerksdorp tomorrow morning. We just can't cancel for no reason." "But there is a reason, a good reason. The Lord done told me I shouldn't go." "I'm sorry, Brother Branham, but we've got to keep that itinerary. We've already spent thousands of dollars on advertising, and the people are expecting you to be there." Bill insisted that the itinerary be canceled, but Schoeman wouldn't budge. Back and forth they reasoned for and against. Finally, Bill grew quiet with frustration. At that moment he was getting nowhere, but he had not yet used his vindication. He would save that for the breakfast table. Reaching his estate, Schoeman turned in through his gate and started down the long driveway. Before he reached his house, he passed a middle-aged man and woman walking the other direction. As soon as Schoeman's car drove by this couple, on foot, Bill recognized the man. "Brother Schoeman, stop." Startled, Schoeman slammed on his brakes. Bill jumped out and introduced himself to the couple. "Hello, I'm Brother Branham." "Brother Branham, I came here to meet you. My name is—" "I know," Bill interrupted. "Your name is Sidney Jackson. The angel of the Lord told me that I was to come to your farm to rest. He also told me that you saw me in a dream smoking a cigarette, but I want to tell you that I didn't smoke a cigarette. The Lord was showing you that I will be disobedient to Him if I do what the National Committee wants me to do. I'll tell you more about that later. Why don't you come back and have breakfast with us?" "I'd love to," said Jackson, a look of bewilderment on his face. "Fine. By the way, Marion is my middle name." Sidney Jackson opened his mouth as though he was going to say something, but was too stunned to speak. After breakfast, Bill declared, "I have an announcement to make. We must not take the itinerary to Klerksdorp and beyond. The Lord told me to stay here in Johannesburg for 2 more weeks, then go over to Mr. Jackson's farm and go hunting with him, so that I can rest up for 10 days. Then I'm to go directly to Durban and stay there until he calls me. I suspect I'll be in Durban about a month." It was an uncomfortable moment for everyone. Ern Baxter said, "Brother Branham, to me that's all right, but you'll have to okay it through the National Committee." "Well, I've told Brother Schoeman, and he's the head of the committee, so now they know." Bill turned to Reverend Schoeman and added, "So that you will know this is the truth, today when we go into the city we will see a native woman wearing a purple shirt." A disbelieving look spread over Schoeman's face. "Brother Branham, I've lived here all my life, and I've never seen a native woman dressed in purple before." "Well, you'll see one today. She'll be standing by a park where there are lots of benches and people selling flowers." Schoeman raised an eyebrow. "I know where that park is." "We'll pass by there today," said Bill. "Later, Brother Baxter and I will be riding over to Pretoria, and we'll stop to see a native girl selling beads. She has the side of her forehead shaved off where there's a big scar. While we are buying some beads, a funny-looking bird will fly across the road. By these signs you will know what I've told you is the truth. The Lord doesn't want us to take that itinerary south." Reverend Schoeman hedged. "I'll talk it over with the other committee members and see what they say." They got busy with other things. About 10 o'clock, Mr. Schoeman asked Bill to ride with him downtown. They stopped at Schoeman's office. On their way back to the estate, Bill noticed the park he had seen in last night's vision. Tapping Reverend Schoeman on the shoulder, Bill pointed out a native woman dressed in purple. All Mr. Schoeman said was, "Well, what do you know about that?" When they got back to the estate, Bill met Justice Duplessis, the man who would be his Afrikaans interpreter during the rest of his stay in South Africa. Duplessis was smartly dressed in a three-piece business suit. With his bald forehead and thin cheeks, he looked a lot like Mr. Schoeman, minus the glasses and beard. Duplessis and Schoeman were going to drive over to Pretoria, which is about 29 miles from Johannesburg, to pray for a man who was dying. They asked Bill if he wanted to come along. Of course he did. Ern Baxter joined them. As they drove, Justice Duplessis explained to his American passengers tidbits about South Africa's native culture. There are usually dozens of native vendors along this stretch of highway. They set up booths along the road, hoping to sell little things they've made to motorists. We'll stop and talk to some of them so you can see what sort of crafts they sell. You might want to buy something for a souvenir. Playfully, Bill punched his manager in the side, but he didn't say anything to Justice Duplessis about last night's vision. Mile after mile rolled by, and they didn't pass any vendors. "That's odd," said Duplessis. "Usually there are lots of salesmen along here." The conversation moved on to something else. After several more miles, they passed one lone girl sitting in a booth by the side of the highway. Duplessis was busy talking, so he drove past her. Half a mile farther, he stopped talking long enough for Bill to mention the vendor they had passed. Remembering his promise, Duplessis turned the car around and drove back. The native girl was selling hand-carved beads. She had a memorable face due to a scar that creased the side of her forehead. Ern Baxter snapped a picture of her. Hearing a squawk, he turned to see a large, many-colored bird flying across the highway. He said, "Look, Brother Branham, isn't that a funny-looking bird?" "That's a wild peacock," said Schoeman. Pointing back at the girl with the scar on her forehead, Bill asked his companions, "Do you remember the vision I told you about this morning?" Baxter took off his glasses. His eyes widened from amazement. "Brother Branham, this is exactly what you said it would be." Looking directly at the chairman, Bill again declared, "Brother Schoeman, I can't take that itinerary tomorrow. I'm sorry if it interferes with your ministers and their plans, but the Lord told me not to take it." Mr. Schoeman sputtered in exasperation. "Brother Branham, we have to take it." "Oh, you may have to take it, but not me." Bill turned and walked back to the car. Ern Baxter caught up with him and whispered, "Brother Branham, if this was America, I would have the authority as your manager to say no, we're not taking that itinerary south. But we're over here at the mercy of these ministers. They don't understand how the Lord leads you by visions. I'm with you 100%, but to make these men understand it, that will be something different. Well, whether they understand it or not, I know what the Lord told me to do, and that is what I intend to do." The next morning, Friday, October 12, 1951, Bill woke up to the sound of motors idling in the driveway. Still dressed in his pajamas, Bill wandered out to the foyer to see what was happening. He was surprised to learn that his escorts had arrived to drive him south. Justice Duplessis was also surprised. "Aren't you ready to go yet, Brother Branham?" "No, sir, I'm not even packed. I'm not planning on going anywhere." "You had better get packed," said Reverend Schoeman. "We're leaving for Klerksdorp as soon as you're ready." Bill stood firm in his resolve. "I won't need to pack for another 2 weeks. Then I'll be packing to go to Jackson's farm to hunt lions. Until then, I keep holding meetings here in Johannesburg." Schoeman shook his head. "We have already closed the meetings here." "You closed the meetings?" That stunned Bill. He had not foreseen this tactic, and it threw him off guard. "That's ridiculous. The Lord has given us favor here and told us to stay. This is where we should be." "It's too late to do anything about it now," Duplessis said. "All the people have gone home, but we have another crowd waiting for us in Klerksdorp." "What size of a city is Klerksdorp?" Bill asked. "It's a small town of about 30,000 people," answered Schoeman. Bill's jaw sagged in amazement. How short-sighted could these men be? Johannesburg had 500,000 people in it, he pointed out. Why are we going to a dinky little place like Klerksdorp? "We promised Brother Fourie that we would bring you to his town," Reverend Schoeman explained, adding hastily, "but we're expecting between 10 and 15,000 people to attend the meetings, most of them coming in from the surrounding countryside." That staggered Bill even more. "Where are you going to put them all? How will they eat?" Feet shuffled as the ministers sent embarrassed glances back and forth. Then Reverend Schoeman admitted, "We don't know, but we promised Brother Fourie we would be there by the 12th of October, so we've got to leave today. And since the meetings here are officially over, you might as well go with us." Bill didn't know what else to do. What was the use of staying in Johannesburg now that the meetings were closed? Reluctantly, he went to his bedroom and packed. There were 3 cars making the 100-mile trek southwest to Klerksdorp. Ern Baxter, Fred Bosworth, Julius Statzkleff, and Billy Paul Branham rode in the second car. Bill rode in the lead car along with Justice Duplessis, Reverend Schoeman, and 2 other members of the National Committee. It was a beautiful sunny day. Reverend Schoeman, Justice Duplessis, and the other committee members talked with animation about the marvelous things they had seen God do in Johannesburg. In contrast, Bill sat quietly, brooding about his disobedience to the will of the Lord. Silently he prayed, "Heavenly Father, I want to go to Durban like you said, but I'm at the mercy of these men. Would you forgive me for my disobedience?" He didn't feel forgiven. Mile after mile, he felt the condemnation getting worse until he could not stand it any longer. "Stop the car," he ordered. The driver pulled over and stopped. "What's the matter, Brother Branham?" "I can't go any further. Brother Schoeman, you're going to have to take me back to Johannesburg. The Lord is telling me not to go on." The other 2 cars had driven up and stopped behind the lead car. Reverend Schoeman walked back to the second car and said to Baxter and Bosworth, "He refuses to go south. You 2 will have to go and talk to him." Ern Baxter and Fred Bosworth got out of their car and walked up to where Bill was standing. The other ministers gathered around them. Baxter said, "Brother Branham, what's the matter?" "Brother Baxter, I'm supposed to hold meetings in Johannesburg for 2 more weeks, then go hunting with Brother Jackson for 10 days, and then go straight to Durban. If I go on to Klerksdorp, I'll be disobeying the Lord." No one in this group believed in Bill's ministry more strongly than Fred Bosworth, a 74-year-old veteran minister who had himself held large divine healing campaigns in the 1920s and 30s. After visiting one of Bill's meetings in 1948, Bosworth had been so impressed that he had come out of retirement to be one of Bill's managers. Now, uncharacteristically, He took the other side. Brother Branham, you're wrong. If you go south with these men, I believe you are going to see exceedingly abundantly above all you could ask or think, quoting Ephesians 3:20. Bill felt like the knife of betrayal had stabbed him between his ribs. Daddy Bosworth, I'm shocked at you. As many times as you've stood on the platform and heard me say, "Thus saith the Lord," has it ever been wrong? Averting his eyes from Bill's accusing glare, Bosworth mumbled, "Well, this time I think you're wrong." The South African ministers got huffy. One man said angrily, "Don't you think that God speaks to someone else besides you?" Bill answered dryly, "Korah had that idea one day, and he told Moses the same thing, but the earth opened and swallowed Korah up. I don't know what God has told you gentlemen. I can't judge that. All I know is what he told me." "God told us to make this itinerary," the minister snapped. "And God told me not to take it," Bill countered. The argument continued. Finally, Ern Baxter pulled Bill aside and whispered, "Brother Branham, we're kind of in a bad spot here. We don't have any money or resources of our own, so we've got to handle this thing diplomatically. I wish you wouldn't say any more about a hunting trip, because they're going to think you really came to Africa for a safari. Half of these ministers don't believe it's right for a Christian to hunt anyway. When you mention hunting, they think about the thousands of people wanting prayer, and they think you're wrong." Bill answered in a voice loud enough for the others to overhear, "If I never hunt again in my life, it doesn't matter to me. I am only wanting to do what God told me to do. Brother Baxter, you've been with me long enough to know that when I see a vision and tell you something in the name of the Lord—" Ern Baxter interrupted, "Brother Branham, if you're following a vision, then I won't interfere any more. Whatever you decide to do, I'll stand by you." He glanced nervously back at the group of ministers standing by the lead car. "But since you're still hooked up with this national committee, and it's getting later in the afternoon, couldn't you go on into Klerksdorp and pray for those people there? Then we could go back to Johannesburg if that's what you want." A scattering of locust trees shaded this spot where the highway curved. Bill reached up and stripped the leaves off a low-hanging branch, carried them in his fist back to the car, and threw them on the minister's feet. "All right," he said tearfully, "we'll drive on into Klerksdorp for the meeting tonight. But remember, thus saith the Lord, from this hour on we're out of the will of God, and there will be nothing but trouble until we return to Johannesburg." As soon as they reached Klerksdorp, they saw how mightily Bill's Johannesburg campaign had stirred the rest of South Africa. Over 10,000 people of European descent had converged on this little provincial city, far outstripping its meager capacity to handle their needs. Looking at the hundreds of makeshift tents and little camps pitched on the hills and in the fields, Bill's driver commented excitedly, "Looks like we'll have a good meeting tonight." Bill shook his head, feeling sorry for these poor people, many of them sick, who were stranded in the open, helplessly exposed to the weather. They drove to the home of Pastor P.F. Fourie, where they would be staying. That evening, Brother Bosworth opened the Klerksdorp campaign. However, before Bill could leave Fourie's house to go to the meeting, a tropical storm blew in. Thunder boomed like cannon blasts, while heavy rain flattened the grass. Hastily, the meeting was canceled. But still it was midnight before Baxter, Bosworth, Schoeman, and the other ministers could get back to Fourie's house. "Oh my, we tried tonight," said Fred Bosworth, shedding his drenched coat and hat. "Didn't I tell you this would happen?" Bill said. "The Lord told me not to come down here. I am out of His will. I have to go back to Johannesburg." The South African ministers disagreed. One of them said, "We can't go back. We made these promises and we have to keep them." "Besides," added another, "we have these storms all the time. This one will blow over tonight, and tomorrow everything will be fine." The thunderstorm did blow over during the night, and Saturday morning dawned clear and warm with promise. But that evening, as they were getting ready to take Bill to the meetings, An unseasonable cold front moved in. The temperature dropped almost to freezing, and the wind blew with shivering force. Again the meeting was canceled. "Didn't I tell you?" said Bill. "Now tomorrow night we'll have an earthquake." The members of the National Committee looked at each other nervously. They were finally giving serious consideration to the words of this unusual man, who said an angel spoke to him. Justice Duplessis asked, "Do you really mean we'll have an earthquake tomorrow?" "I don't know whether we will or not," Bill qualified. "I just said that as an illustration. But something bad has got to happen because we're out of the will of God." Mrs. Faree set some refreshments on the table, then sat down to listen to the conversation. Bill leaned forward in his chair and said that earlier in the afternoon he had seen a vision of Mrs. Faree, but could not speak it until everyone was sitting at the table exactly as the vision had shown. He told Mrs. Faree about things that happened in her childhood. Then he told her she had heart disease and stomach trouble caused by nervousness, but not to worry because Jesus Christ had healed her. Astonished phrases tumbled from the mouths of the South African ministers. Bill asked, "Now do you believe me? God has told me to go back to Johannesburg, stay there for 2 weeks, then go up to Brother Jackson's farm for a rest. From there go straight to Durban. Then I'll go home." Fred Bosworth said, "Brother Branham, if you go that route, you won't be able to minister to as many African natives as you could by traveling through these smaller places." On this point, the South African ministers kept quiet, knowing that the majority of the meetings they had scheduled were for the European segment of the population. Bill did not learn until later that Durban was the only place in South Africa where native Africans would be allowed to attend the same meetings as the white Africans. Bosworth continued, "Brother Branham, if you will follow this itinerary south, I believe that you will see God do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or think." Putting a weary hand on his friend's shoulder, Bill said, "Brother Bosworth, as many battles as we've been in together, and now you're doubting me. I tell you in the name of Jesus that we're out of His will, and it's going to be nothing but trouble from here on." "Still," said Reverend Schoeman, "we have already committed ourselves to certain brothers, so we have to follow this itinerary through." Since they would not accept the argument of supernatural guidance, Bill tried common sense. Look at it logically for a minute. In Johannesburg, we have the favor of the newspapers and the medical association, and there are hundreds of thousands of people there with places to eat and sleep. But here the people are lying out in the open with no place to eat. Last night they almost drowned, and tonight they're out there freezing. If you just look at it in the natural, doesn't it make sense to go back to Johannesburg? Some mumbling and coughing passed between the ministers before Schoeman responded. "Brother Branham, we have thousands of dollars invested in advertising on this tour. We have the buildings and the grounds already rented. The dates are set. The times are set. The people have made their plans, and some have already traveled. We have made our promises, and we can't go back on our word." Bill said, "Well, I didn't promise anybody, and in the morning I'm going back to Johannesburg." Justice Duplessis asked, "What are you going to do when you get there?" They had him there. Bill didn't have any money, and he couldn't do anything by himself. So even if he did go back to Johannesburg, he would have to have the cooperation of these same men, who were now opposing such a move. He was in a terrible fix. As he sat there pondering his dilemma, all of a sudden he remembered the prophecy that had come to him in Shreveport, Louisiana, when the Lord warned him that Satan was going to lay a trap for him in South Africa. Bill had assumed the trap would have something to do with witch doctors and demons, but that wasn't it at all. Here was the trap, right here among his Christian brethren. The political jaws of their denominational system had snapped closed around him, holding him firmly between their cold, unyielding teeth, keeping him from doing what the Lord had told him to do. His situation seemed hopeless. Bill warned his sponsors, "As Paul said long ago, you should have listened to me and not have loosed from Crete and caused all this trouble. Now, brethren, God has a permissive will, but I never like to work in His permissive will. I want His perfect will. The committee members liked the idea of God having a permissive will. One said, "I think this is a case where it would be good to operate in the permissive will of God. Brother Branham, why don't you ask the Lord if you can?" By now it was 2 o'clock in the morning. They had been arguing since 10 o'clock. Weary and discouraged, Bill said, "All right, I'll pray about it one more time." Billy Paul Branham, who'd been listening quietly through the 4-hour argument, followed his father into the bedroom and shut the door. He watched his father cross the room and look out the window at the windstorm that was still blowing. His father stood with his shoulders hunched slightly, looking like a beaten man. Crossing the room, Billy Paul put one arm around his father's shoulder and said, "Daddy, don't you listen to that bunch of preachers. You do what God is telling you to do." "Billy, I'm all tore up. I don't know how I can do what God wants me to do. I don't have any money. Even if I go back to Johannesburg now, I don't see how I could hold any meetings without the cooperation of these men. And you can see they won't cooperate. If ever I stood between a rock and a hard place, I'm there now. Daddy, if nobody else in the whole country stands by you, I'll stand by you." Bill hugged his son. "Pray with me, Billy." They knelt between the twin beds and prayed together, but soon Billy Paul gave in to the late hour, crawled up on his bed, and fell asleep. Bill, on the other hand, was too troubled to sleep. His thoughts ricocheted back and forth between the rock and the hard place that had him trapped. Somehow he had to stand against the very people who had invited him to South Africa. How could he persuade them to listen? What if he couldn't persuade them? How could he do God's will in both Johannesburg and Durban without the cooperation of these men? His dilemma seemed insurmountable. The emotion in his head felt like a wet dish rag being twisted tighter and tighter, slowly squeezing out the moisture. And that moisture was seeping from the inside corners of his eyes tinged with salt. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Bill felt the presence of the angel of the Lord. In another moment, a light formed in the air, then rose to the ceiling, leaving the angel of the Lord standing beneath its amber flame. Outside, the wind blew, rattling the window panes. Bill shivered in fear. Every time he met the angel of the Lord face to face, he felt the same paralyzing fear. The supernatural never became common to him. It was a dimension impossible to understand and difficult for his human senses to bear. But even as he trembled, he felt thankful that the angel had come. Perhaps now his deadlock could be broken. Bill asked, "Who are these men, and what do they mean?" The angel stood with his arms folded. Although Bill had never seen the angel smile, now his piercing gaze looked severe. "Go on with them," the angel said sternly. "Since you have started with them, now you'll have to do it. But remember, if you do go south with them, you're going to suffer for it. Wake up Billy Paul and tell him, 'Thus saith the Lord, tomorrow morning is going to break warm and pretty.' They will take Billy Paul early to Sunday school. Because the meetings have been so delayed, Ern Baxter is going to send Billy Paul back to get you so you can pray for the sick. Be ready to go. Your son will come with a young man in a black car. On the way, he will stop and pick up a second young man. After that..." Here Bill saw 2 natives standing near a eucalyptus tree by a bridge. One of the natives, who was dressed in a white safari suit, had his arm raised and was about to strike the other native with a stick. The angel said, "Billy Paul will call your attention to this. By these signs you will know that I have given you permission to go south. But remember, you'll suffer for it." When he came out of the vision, the angel was gone. Bill woke up his son and said, "Billy, the angel of the Lord has just visited me." He told Billy Paul what the angel said. Then he rushed to the room where Baxter and Bosworth and Stadsclef were sleeping. "Brothers, wake up. I have thus saith the Lord. He has given me permission to go south with you, but I'm going to suffer for it because it's not the perfect will of God. In fact, Our meetings will not be as successful as they could be because we really shouldn't go. Tomorrow morning the storm will be over." And from there he told them the other details of the vision. Sunday morning dawned as clear, calm, and warm as the angel said it would. Billy Paul went to Sunday school with Ern Baxter and the members of the National Committee. Soon 2 young men in a black car brought Billy Paul back to the house to get his father. Bill was ready. On their way down to the meeting grounds, they crossed a narrow bridge. There, next to a eucalyptus tree, stood 2 natives, one of them dressed in a white safari suit. Billy Paul pointed. "Look, Daddy, that man's got a stick, and he's going to hit that other man." Bill nodded. "Remember what I told you last night, Paul. I can go south, but I will suffer for it."